Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. I don't actually see you, but spiritually I do. So today I'm going to give a talk on Kwan Yin and the path of compassion. Before I start, let's have a little bit of a few moments to calm the mind. Remember what I've said in previous talks about tuning the mind and the breath. If the breath is noisy and erratic, the mind will also be noisy and erratic, and vice versa. If the mind is noisy and erratic, the breath will be. So you've got to tune them both so the breath becomes silent and very rhythmic, and that will affect the mind in a positive way. Also, two things to watch out for in meditation are distraction and oblivion. Don't let the mind become distracted by anything, and don't let it go into a state of oblivion. Keep your mind crystal clear and aware. So let's just breathe out any tension. Let's get nice and relaxed and be at peace. And breathe out and just be relaxed. Okay, it's going to be a share screen some of the time. So we're talking about Kwan Yin and the path of compassion today. And Kwan Yin is the goddess of compassion in China and Japan, where she's called Canon, and a few other Asiatic countries where she is revered by millions. There are countless shrines to her, and she is prayed for all manner of things, from the safe birth of a child to having good luck in business, even gambling, etc., etc. And also, there are the 100 poems of Kwan Yin to be used as a method of divination, as well as subjects for meditation. This is an example of a shrine. And she's also connected to other goddesses, such as the Tibetan Tara and other Indian deities, etc. So I'm going to use ideas and mental images from many sources to create a kaleidoscopic view of Kwan Yin that hopefully may stimulate the mind, but keep the mystery and wonder alive. And I'm not trying to give out cut and dried answers, as when it comes to theosophy and any true spirituality, there are no cut and dried answers. H.P. Blavatsky once said that orthodoxy in theosophy was neither desirable nor possible. Beyond the popular conceptions, there's a much deeper aspect to this wonderful being, as we shall discover in this talk. So originally, Kwan Yin was a male deity, Avalokiteshvara, who's pictured here, who is described in the Theosophical Glossary, which was compiled by H.P. Blavatsky and others after her death, as the onlooking Lord. In the exoteric interpretation, he is Padmapani, the lotus bearer and the lotus born in Tibet. In Tibet, he is the first divine ancestor of the Tibetans, the complete incarnation or avatar of Avalokiteshvara. But in esoteric philosophy, Avaloki, the onlooker, is the higher self, while Padmapani is the higher ego, or manas, which is the mind, or the higher aspects of the mind. The mystic formula Om Mani Padme Hum is specifically used to invoke their joint help. While popular fancy claims for Avalokiteshvara many incarnations on earth and sees in him, not very wrongly, the spiritual guide of every believer, the esoteric interpretation sees in him the Logos, both celestial and human. Therefore, when the Yogacarya school has declared Avalokiteshvara as Padmapani to be the Dhyani Bodhisattva of Amitabha Buddha, it is indeed because the former is the spiritual reflex in the world of forms of the latter, both being one in heaven, the other on earth. So it may seem a bit complex, but it'll all come clearer later on. It is popularly said that Avalokiteshvara and Kwan Yin are incarnations of Amitabha Buddha, who in Buddhism is regarded as the Buddha of infinite light and also of boundless love. H.P. Blavatsky states in The Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, page 108, that as the reader is supposed not to be acquainted with the Jnana Buddhas, it is as well to say at once that according to the Orientalists, there are 5 jhanis, while the celestial Buddhas, of whom the human Buddhas are the manifestations in the world of form and matter. Esoterically, however, the Jnani Buddhas are 7, of whom 5 only have hitherto manifested, and 2 are to come in the 6th and 7th root races. They are, so to speak, the eternal prototypes of the Buddhas who appear on this earth, each of whom has his particular divine prototype. So, for instance, Amitabha is the Dhyani Buddha of Gautama Sakyamuni, manifesting through him whenever this great soul incarnates on earth, as he did in Tsongkhapa. As a synthesis of the 7 Jnani Buddhas, Avalokiteshvara was the first Buddha, the Logos. So Amitabha is the inner god of Gautama, who in China is called Amita Buddha. So again, that seems complicated. But in certain schools of Buddhism, such as the Pure Land school in Japan, it is believed that to call the name of Amitabha Buddha by use of the mantra Namu Amida Butsu will help them to realize enlightenment and to be reborn in the Pure Land, which is a Buddhist heaven in the Western paradise. This is because Amitabha Buddha made a vow to help humanity and to save those who called his name. Esoterically, this refers to the power of the Buddha nature within each one of us. The Pure Land symbolic of a state of being and not a location. In esoteric teaching, Amitabha is the Dhyani Buddha or Chuan of this 4th round, Avalokiteshvara being the Bodhisattva incarnation of Amitabha, appearing at the end of the 4th root race, according to H.P. Blavatsky. And Gautama Buddha is the Manushi or human Buddha, appearing at the juncture of the 4th and 5th sub-races. Another will appear at the juncture of the 6th and 7th. So that sounds complicated, but in theosophical teaching, we have 7 rounds of existence or manvantaras. It's the same in Hindu teaching as well. And each of these manvantaras has 7 races or root races that it has to go through, and 7 sub-races. So we know in the 4th, as you can see from this, Amitabha is the Buddha of the 4th race, and then he's reincarnated in Avalokiteshvara, who incarnates in Gautama. So it comes down from the highest, which is Amitabha Buddha, and he has a presence on earth. He incarnated in Avalokiteshvara, who overshadows Gautama, or incarnates in Gautama, who's the earthly Buddha that we all know. We can see the former ones also mentioned. So in the 5th race, it will be Amoghasiddhi, who is a Jnani Buddha, who will incarnate in the Bodhisattva Visvapani, and the human Buddha on this earth will be Maitreya. And that's not for many, many thousands of years. And then the 6th and 7th up to now are not known to the profane. So it's much simpler than it first appears, much simpler. So somewhere along the line, this male deity became female. In my research, I came across quite a few reasons for this one. One being that with the advent of Christianity into China and the appearance of the Virgin Mary, as often happens, the prevalent culture integrated the Blessed Virgin into their beliefs. And hence Kwan Yin arose. Or perhaps it was to make the whole teaching more accessible to the ordinary people, as compassion can be more easily identified with a beautiful woman than a rather odd deity. Nurturing, caring, and compassion are usually more associated with a female nature, whether we are talking about women or the feminine or yin energies within each one of us, male or female. Avalokiteshvara was anthropomorphized into a being with 1,000 arms and an eye in the center of every hand, meaning to show his compassion for all beings and his all-seeing nature and his ability and willingness to help all living things. But it paradoxically made him seem rather cold and distant to the ordinary man and woman. Kwan Yin is much more approachable and motherly in her appearance, though she does occasionally appear in paintings in the 1,000-arm form, but it is much rarer. The name Kwan Yin literally means to perceive sound. We will look into this later. But let's first explore the fascinating popular culture of Kwan Yin. As the Dalai Lama is said to be an incarnation of Avalokiteshvara, so Kwan Yin is also said to have her incarnations. It is also hinted that she may still be incarnating in a lineage of female spiritual figures, a fact perhaps hidden from the profane. There's no legend in China from the precious scroll of fragrant mountains concerning a girl called Miao Xian, one of 3 sisters, who is said to be one of these incarnations, and maybe where a lot of the popular ideas arose, as the tale is rich in symbology. I will tell it here. Well, one version anyway, there are quite a few versions. This dates from around the 11th century AD. Miao Xian was the daughter of a cruel king who wanted her to marry a wealthy but uncaring man. According to the story, after the king asked his daughter to marry the wealthy man, she told him that she would obey his command so long as the marriage eased 3 misfortunes. The king asked his daughter, what were the 3 misfortunes that the marriage should ease? Miao Xian explained that the first misfortune was the suffering people endure as they age. The second misfortune it should ease was the suffering people endured when they fall ill. The third misfortune it should ease was the suffering caused by death. If the marriage could not ease any of the above, then she would rather retire to a life of religion forever. When her father asked who could ease all the above, Miao Xian pointed out that her doctor was able to do all of these things. Her father grew angry as he wanted her to marry a person of power and wealth, not a healer. He forced her into hard labor and reduced her food and drink, but this did not cease her or cause her to yield. Every day, she begged to be able to enter a temple and become a nun instead of marrying. Her father eventually allowed her to work in the temple, but asked the nuns to give her the toughest tasks in order to discourage her. The nuns forced Miao Xian to work all day and all night, while others slept, in order to finish her work. However, she was such a good person that the animals living around the temple began to help her with her chores. Her father, seeing this, became so frustrated that he attempted to burn down the temple. Miao Xian put out the fire with her bare hands and suffered no burns. Now struck with fear, her father ordered her to be put to death. A very fatherly action. According to this legend, as the executioner tried to carry out her father's orders, his axe shattered into 1,000 pieces. He then tried a sword, which likewise shattered. He tried to shoot Miao Xian down with arrows, but they all veered off. Finally, in desperation, he used his hands. Miao Xian, realizing the fate the executioner would meet at her father's hand should she fail to let herself die, forgave the executioner for attempting to kill her. It is said that she voluntarily took on the massive karmic guilt the executioner generated for killing her, thus leaving him guiltless. It is because of this that she descended into the hell-like realms. While there, she witnessed firsthand the suffering and horrors beings there must endure, and was overwhelmed with grief. Filled with compassion, she released all the good karma she had accumulated through her many lifetimes, thus freeing many suffering souls back into heaven and earth. In the process, that hell-like realm became a paradise. She said that the king of hell sent her back to earth to prevent the utter destruction of his realm, and that upon her return, she appeared on Fragrant Mountain. The legend of Miao Xian usually ends with Miao Xian's father falling ill with jaundice. No physician was able to cure him. Then a monk appeared saying that the jaundice could be cured by making a medicine out of the arm and eye of one without anger. The monk further suggested that such a person could be found on Fragrant Mountain. When asked, Miao Xian willingly offered up her eyes and arms. Her father was cured of his illness and went to the Fragrant Mountain to give thanks to the person. When he discovered that his own daughter had made the sacrifice, he begged for forgiveness. The story concludes with Miao Xian being transformed into Kwan Yin, and the king, queen, and her two sisters building a temple on the mountain for her. She began her journey to heaven and was about to cross over when she heard a cry of suffering from the world below. She turned around and saw the massive suffering endured by the people of the world. Filled with compassion, she returned to earth, vowing never to leave till such time as all suffering has ended. And as said, she is still supposed to be reincarnating in certain female individuals. After her return to earth, Kwan Yin was said to have stayed a few years on the island of Mount Putuo. And here's the mountain. People still go there, and that's a statue of Kwan Yin. So it's actually a place that exists, and people still go there. People still visit. And there she practiced meditation and helped the sailors and fishermen who got stranded. Kwan Yin is frequently worshipped as the patron of sailors and fishermen due to this. She's said to frequently becalm the ocean when boats are threatened with rocks. After some decades, Kwan Yin returned to Fragrant Mountain to continue her meditation. Now, symbols associated with Kwan Yin are a willow branch held in her right hand, usually, with which she sprinkles divine nectar, and in her left hand, a vase filled with this nectar of compassion and wisdom, which are the hallmarks of a bodhisattva Also a dove, representing fruitfulness and fertility on many different levels. A book or scroll of prayers, which she holds in her hand, representing the Dharma or the teaching of the Buddha. And also a sutra or Buddhist text, which Miao Xin is said to have constantly recited, and a rosary adorning her neck, with which she calls upon the Buddhas for assistance when needed, or perhaps the Buddha nature or universal life force. Despite her close association with Buddhism, she transcends any attachment to any religion, and people of different religions or none revere her. Two more things that are associated with Kwan Yin and Avalokiteshvara are the mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, as mentioned earlier, translated as Hail to the jewel in the lotus, or Hail to the higher self, and the Heart Sutra. Unfortunately, of course, you won't be able to read that. But it's worth getting a copy of it. It's readily available online. A very short but succinct Buddhist teaching in which the idea that form is emptiness and emptiness is form is put forward, echoed in the teachings of The Voice of the Silence by H.P. Blavatsky, where it says that we should study the fullness of the seeming void and the voidness of the seeming full. Both the mantra and the sutra could be the subjects of talks and study groups. But as I'm focusing on Kwan Yin, I'll just have to mention them in passing at the moment. All of this, of course, is symbolic of the Bodhisattva vow to help humanity and not to enter nirvana until all beings are enlightened. In fact, there is a vow attributed to Kwan Yin known as the Pledge of Kwan Yin, which is well worth meditating upon. I think my face covers it up a little bit. But it says, never will I seek nor receive private individual salvation. Never will I enter into final peace alone. But forever and everywhere will I live and strive for the redemption of every creature throughout the world from the bonds of conditioned existence. And the theosophical writer Raghavan Iyer, in an article on the Pledge of Kwan Yin, writes, the Kwan Yin Pledge is a bodhisattvic vow taken on behalf of all living beings. It is closely connected with the bodhicitta, the wisdom-seeking mind, the seed of enlightenment. The idea that an unenlightened human being can effectively generate a seed of enlightenment is a central assumption behind the compassionate teaching of Mahatmas and Bodhisattvas, of the Buddhas and Christs. A drop of water is suggestive of an ocean, a flashing spark or single flame to an ocean of light. The minuscule mirrors the large, as above, so below. Herein lies the hidden strength of the Kwan Yin Pledge. What may seem small from the standpoint of the personal self, when it is genuinely offered on behalf of the limitless universe of living beings and of all humanity, past, present, and future, it can truly negate the finality of finitude. Also, the ultimacy of what seems urgent, the immensity of what appears immediate. The human mind ceaselessly creates false valuations, giving ephemera an excessive sense of reality to uphold itself in a world of flux. The Kwan Yin Pledge can be taken by anyone at any time, but the level of thought and intensity with which it is taken will determine the degree and reliability of response of the whole of one's being. Shantideva puts this in the form of an ordination. He says, when the Sagatas of former times committed themselves to the bodhicitta, they gradually established themselves in the practice of a bodhisattva. So I too commit myself to the bodhicitta for the welfare of all beings, and will gradually establish myself in the practice of a bodhisattva. Today my birth has become fruitful. My birth as a human being is justified. Today I am born in the Buddha family. I am now a son of the Buddha. Now I am determined to perform these acts appropriate to my family. I will not violate the purity of this faultless, noble family. So anyone truly interested in this subject would do well to read this article and also the Kwan Yin Sutra. This has been developed from a chapter in a Buddhist scripture called the Lotus Sutra and describes the wonderful effects of meditating upon Kwan Yin or Avalokiteshvara, as it was in the Lotus Sutra. If we bear in mind the quote I gave earlier, equating Avalokiteshvara and Kwan Yin with the higher self, then many wonderful doors of perception are opened to us. It is not in fact help from an exterior being, but an awakening of powers within us that have not even been touched upon by the majority of people. Even students of occultism and theosophy may prefer the comfort zone of books and lectures to the wonders that lie within the very heart of us all. So when it says in the Kwan Yin Sutra that the Buddha told inexhaustible intention bodhisattva, good man, if any of the limitless hundreds of thousands of myriads of kotis of living beings who are undergoing all kinds of suffering hear of Kwan Yin Bodhisattva and recite her name single-mindedly, Kwan Yin Bodhisattva will immediately hear their voices and rescue them. If a person who upholds the name of Kwan Yin Bodhisattva enters a great fire, the fire will not burn him or her, all because of this Bodhisattva's awesome spiritual power. If a person being tossed about in the great sea calls out to the Bodhisattva's name, he will find a shallow place. Further, if a person who is about to be harmed calls out the name of Kwan Yin Bodhisattva, the knives and staves of the attackers will break into pieces and he will be saved. If living beings who have much sexual desire constantly and reverently recite the names of Kwan Yin Bodhisattva, they will be separated from desire. If those who have much hatred constantly and reverently recite the name of Kwan Yin Bodhisattva, they will be separated from hatred. Inexhaustible intention, Kwan Yin Bodhisattva has great, awesome spiritual powers such as these and confers great benefits. Therefore, living beings should always be mindful of her. If women who seek sons bow and make offerings to Kwan Yin Bodhisattva, they will give birth to blessed, virtuous, and wise sons. If they seek daughters, they will give birth to upright and handsome daughters who have planted roots of virtue in previous lives and who are regarded and respected by all. Inexhaustible intention. Kwan Yin Bodhisattva has powers such as these. If there are living beings who reverently bow to Kwan Yin Bodhisattva, they'll be blessed and their efforts will not be in vain. Therefore, living beings should all receive and uphold the name of Kwan Yin Bodhisattva. So many people may smile at this, but if we look upon it as referring to a power that we all possess and can make use of, it becomes very much clearer. If we use only a tiny portion of our brain power, this is also true of our spiritual power, but on a much larger scale. So the sutra is inspirational and empowering in a good way, as a means of opening our consciousness to something that we all share, the life force of the universe, and our Buddha nature. Kwan Yin, as we shall see as we progress on our journey through this talk, is not an external being as such, but an inner power, the power of compassion and love for all beings. This power has hardly been touched on in this modern world, so we are not aware of its potential. People are much more interested in making money while learning and developing to develop psychic powers for selfish reasons. But compassion is indeed the greatest of the powers that is latent in the human being. But to return to the Theosophical Glossary for a moment, and to a definition that I may have used before in other talks, to the word Karma Deva. That's K-A-M-A-D-E-V-A. It's not karma, K-A-R. We talk about karma, K-A-M-A, as being related to desire, such as the Kama Sutra. It says, though, that the word in popular culture, that's how it's looked at in the popular culture, but the word refers to the God of love, and the word Kama refers to desire in a lower sense, as I said in the Kama Sutra originally. But it's completely different in the Theosophical Glossary in its original intention, which says that karma is the first conscious, all-embracing desire for universal good, love, and for all that lives and feels, needs help and kindness. The first feeling of infinite tender compassion and mercy that arose in the consciousness of the creative one force as soon as it came into life and being as a ray from the Absolute. Says the Rig Veda, desire first arose in it, which was the primal germ of mind, and which sages, searching with their intellect, have discovered in their heart to be the bond which connects entity with non-entity, or manas, again the mind, the higher aspect of the mind, with pure Atma Buddhi. There is no idea of sexual love in the conception. Kama is preeminently the divine desire of creating happiness and love. So this feeling ties in very well with the energy associated with Kwan Yin, and therefore is something that we can tap into as human beings, as we are inwardly one with this creative force. H.P. Blavatsky states in the key to Theosophy regarding karma, K-A-R-M-A this time, she says that as a general rule, and within certain limits, which define the age to which we belong, the law of karma cannot be hastened or retarded in its fulfillment. But of this I am certain, the point of possibility in either of these directions has never yet been touched. An incredible statement, that. So I think that the same is true of compassion. We have hardly touched upon its wondrous power, as exemplified by Kwan Yin. H.P. Blavatsky again in The Secret Doctrine says, Vach and Kwan Yin are both the magic potency of occult sound in nature and ether, which voice calls forth Sien Chan, the elusive form of the universe out of chaos and the 7 elements. Again, very interesting. Well, in a labyrinth of words, the mind is lost like a man in a thick forest, as Shankaracharya says. Just this course has so many aspects to it that it would require a study course. So let's try to extract something pertinent to our talk from this labyrinth of words if we can. Let's try to make the ideas live for us in our lives. If we can think of this voice, this sound, not as a cold scientific fact, but as I said earlier, as something inspiring, uplifting and beautiful, something that is our witness, our resting place, our asylum and our friend, and will always be there to guide us in the darkness of our lives, then it begins to have some meaning for us, not as a subject for intellectual study, but as a reality in our day-to-day lives. This is what really matters to us, not just words on paper. It is this harmonious sound that called forth the universe into being at the end of the long pralaya, a time of apparent rest. This is the time between Manvantaras, or even between races. It's a time of rest, time of peace. But everything's in importance here. Everything's in potential. It's not dead. It's not a dead time. Everything's in potential for the next awakening. So it is this sound that started the motion that stirred the atoms into the correspondences and connections that started the elusive forms of this universe out of so-called chaos and the seven elements. It is this feeling of infinite tender compassion and mercy. So this sound echoes deep in our hearts and leads us onwards ever deeper into our very being. But it is also always a beautiful and harmonious sound, only distorted by the turbulence of our senses, thoughts and emotions, etc. That is the idea of stilling the mind in meditation to allow us to feel this sound reverberating in our deepest being. Kwan Yin, then, is the embodiment of this sound in the sense that she represents this compassionate state of being, the dimension to our nature that is capable of feeling its oneness with all other things throughout this world and universe. So what exactly is compassion? Again, we read about it in many works like The Voice of the Silence, but do we know what it really is? Or do we stop at the level of words and imagery? In The Voice of the Silence, it is said that compassion is no attribute. It is the law of laws, eternal harmony, Elias self, a sureless universal essence, the light of everlasting right and fitness of all things, the law of love, eternal. So it is love eternal that upholds the universe. It is not surprising that the vast majority of people not able or willing to try to feel this love and harmony that pervades the universe in the depths of their hearts would materialize it in the form of a perceptible being on which they could focus their meditations and prayers. In this way, they could tap into powers that devotion can bring into manifestation. This explains the effectiveness of prayers to Kwan Yin by the most devoted of her followers, and therefore the reverence in which she is held. People need comfort. They need to feel that there is a protecting and nurturing power. Once we become aware of the transience of this particular life, we need to find something more permanent, something that does not change, despite the changes around and within us. As said earlier, I think the powers latent within us have hardly been touched upon and can only be understood if we live the life requisite and have a faith and confidence in them based upon knowledge. So love is the key, as it says here. This is from a book, I think it was from the, not actually from Kwan Yin, I think it was something that was written later. But it's sort of very pertinent. When you want to hate, be love. When you want to judge, be love. When you want to fight, be love. And when you want to be right, be love. Interesting. So we have to live the life requisite and have a faith and confidence in them based upon knowledge. Otherwise, the faith in some external being is much more powerful, as demonstrated by those who have faith in Jesus or Krishna, for example. Many will be prepared to die for Jesus or for God or for Allah, and incredible so-called miracles and healing performed by those who believe that an external being is working through them. Such things would not have been possible if they'd relied mainly upon their own selves at their stage of development. That such wonders do occur is a proven fact, and it may be said that as long as the end is achieved, it does not matter the method used, as long as the motive is unselfish and pure and brings benefit to the recipients. So this picture says rocks, willows, lotus ponds, or running water are often indications of her presence. In the chime of bronze or jade, the sigh of wind in the pines, the prattle and tinkle of streams, her voice is heard. So maybe she can be regarded as the sound of nature. The Chinese say that nature has a key sound that's heard in everything, in all these things that are mentioned here. And if she is the divine voice manifest, she could be said to be the voice and the sound of nature as well. I think H.P. Blavatsky says somewhere that the keynote of nature is the middle F of the piano. In one of her writings, yeah. So she is a voice of nature too. She's divine sound. And divine sound, of course, there's the first sound that came into being, which is said to be the Om. And that shattered itself as it came down through, manifested more and more, shattered itself into millions and billions of sounds. But in essence, they're all the same sound. So they all have the same keynote. Or the sounds of nature, at least. And that's from a book by John Blofeld, The Bodhisattva of Compassion, The Mystical Traditions of Kwan Yin, which is actually a book I love very much. It's one of my favourite books. It's beautifully written, very poetic, and it's a wonderfully written book. So I would advise it to anybody who's interested. He goes to all the bit more on the esoteric side, much more on the legends and the ideas and traditions of Kwan Yin. It's a very beautiful book. Hopefully the reverence felt for Kwan Yin and her continuing popularity in certain Asiatic countries is becoming clearer. It may also be said that when we see an act of kindness or a woman who has dedicated herself to helping others, that she is in a way an incarnation of Kwan Yin, or of that compassion that Kwan Yin represents. In the case of a man, we'd most likely think of a bodhisattva in general, but Kwan Yin relates more to the female. Kindness and love are what humanity needs the most. TV programs and the media in general tend to tell us that we must be tough to survive in this world, and in business and politics, ruthlessness is often encouraged. There are sayings such as, one must be cruel to be kind, and maybe in certain cases this is needed. But we must always try, as H.P. Blavatsky once wrote, to pass the gentlest sentence possible on those that err, and to try to see beyond the mask to the inner being. The talisman is to realize that behind the mask of personality, there is one life, one energy, and one spirit that links us all in a universal brotherhood. If we can live in this oneness, we'll see life differently and treat people with much more respect. We will also cease to judge and to try to understand what led a certain person to a particular line of action. We will not try to see everyone else as clones of ourselves and expect them to act in a certain situation as we would, which is one of the biggest errors that we could fall into, though it is one of the most neglected and overlooked. 1,000 monks, 1,000 ways, as the Zen saying goes. We all have our own path, and dependent upon our life situation, we need to adapt ourselves to the way of life best suited to the unfoldment of our own spirituality. This way may sometimes be distasteful to others, to some of our fellow travellers, who may criticize us and tell us that we are going wrong. But if we are following the path of brotherhood and love and developing compassion, we are on our own way. No one knows us deep in our very being, Even we have trouble knowing ourselves. So we must take heart from that. We must also strive to listen to that voice within. H.P. Blavatsky states in The Key to Theosophy, when discussing how to put theosophy into practice, that it is by the enlightened application of our precepts to practice, by the use of our higher reason, spiritual intuition, and moral sense, and by following the dictates of what we call the still small voice of our conscience, which is that of our ego, and which speaks louder in us than the earthquakes and the thunders of Jehovah, wherein the Lord is not. And in the Bowen Notes, which was a report on the Secret Doctrine study class, she says, "It is worse than useless going to those whom we imagine to be advanced students," she said, "and asking them to give us an interpretation of the secret doctrine. They cannot do it. If they try, or they give our cut and dried exoteric renderings, which do not remotely resemble the truth. To accept such interpretations means anchoring ourselves to fixed ideas, whereas truth lies beyond any ideas we can formulate or express. Exoteric interpretations are all very well, and she does not condemn them so long as they are taken as pointers for beginners and are not accepted by them as anything more. Many persons who are in, or who will be in the future, be in the Theosophical Society, are of course potentially incapable of any advance beyond the range of a common exoteric conception. But there are and will be others, and for them she sets out the following and true way of approaching the secret doctrine. Come to the secret doctrine, she says, without any hope of getting the final truth of existence from it, or with any idea other than seeing how far it may lead towards the truth. See and study a means of exercising and developing the mind never touched by other studies. End of quote. Well, so she then goes on to say that we should always keep the idea of the oneness of all things in mind as we proceed with our studies, or they will lose their meaning. And elsewhere, that orthodoxy is neither desirable or possible in theosophy, as I mentioned earlier. Although all this is wonderful, does it fully explain compassion? Why do we feel such a rising of spirits when someone performs an act of heroism? Why do we feel such sorrow when we see the frailty of old age or the dependence of a child or animal? Why do our hearts break when we hear and see reports of some natural disaster? Why do our spirits sink when we become aware of some conflict somewhere in the world, or of man's inhumanity to man in various parts of the world, or his abuse of animals or nature? Is it because, aware as we are of man's true nature and potential, we feel our hearts cry out in despair, as in the voice of the silence, where it says, "Alas, alas, that all men should possess a lyre, be one with a great soul, and that possessing it, a lyre, should so little avail them." A lyre should so little avail them. So maybe it does explain more than we think, in that if we can live in this oneness, if we can show pity and be gentle and kind, then we will be in touch with the soul of all things, and all pain will become ours, and all joy also, because we are ceasing to be separate and becoming whole. Again, in the voice of the silence, it tells us that when we have ceased to hear the many, we may discern the one, the inner sound which kills the outer. Then we will hear the voice of Kwan Yin, the melodious voice which drowns all others. Then she may speak to us in our heart of hearts and say, "Let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun. Let not the fierce sun dry one tear of pain before thyself has wiped it from the sufferer's eye. But let each burning human tear drop on thy heart and there remain, nor ever brush it off, until the pain that caused it is removed. So this is truly the voice of Kwan Yin, the mystical being that we are following in this talk today. The voice that millions have heard, transcending race, creed, sex, caste, or colour. It is the feeling that brings all that we read and study as theosophical or spiritual students into focus, that negates all the stereotypes and dissolves all the mental barriers that we set up between ourselves and what truly matters on this path. It brings us face to face with what we are in reality and the feelings and intuitions that we share with our fellow creatures upon this earth. It is said that Kwan Yin, like Avalokiteshvara, is the embodiment of the compassion of all the Buddhas and provides a focal point for many people to come into contact with an actualization of that compassion and for it to seem real to them. In that way, it is helpful to so many. For those who need something deeper and are not satisfied with any concepts that delimit the scope of the consciousness in us, they may need to pass beyond any formalized imagery and enter the silence which always speaks to us. Silence to the physical ears is sound on a different level, the harmonious sound that forever reverberates at our core. But as H.P. Blavatsky once again says in a fragment of writing on idolatry, the outward form of idolatry is but a veil, concealing the one truth, like the veil of the Satic goddess. Only that truth, being for the few, escapes the majority. To the pious profane, the veil recovers a celestial locality, thickly peopled with divine beings, dwarfs and giants, good and wicked powers, all of whom are no better than human caricatures. Yet while for the great majority the space behind the veil is really impenetrable, if it would but confess the real state of its mind, those endowed with the third eye, the eye of Shiva, discern in the Cimmerian darkness and chaos of light, in whose intense radiance all shape born of human conception disappears, leaving the all-informing divine presence to be felt, not seen, sensed, never expressed. End of quote. This is indeed the highest and purest we can possibly achieve. But for those of us who may not have reached this state, there are many stages on the path, and many may find comfort in highly spiritual concepts like that of Kwan Yin, who is the highest and purest of all concepts, issuing from the collective mind of humanity, and expressing something within inexpressibly beautiful and tender, which consecrates our whole being and provides a gateway to the good, the true, and the beautiful, and then beyond to something far more wondrous. Our priority as theosophists, as theosophical students, aspiring to be theosophists, and to all people on the true spiritual path, it is to promote a universal brotherhood of humanity, regardless of race, creed, sex, caste, or colour, and to show that this can only be achieved effectively by soul solidarity and not by any political or social means. We must do as Pythagoras urged us to do, and I repeat so many times, and take heart, because the race of man is divine. Beyond the physical, there is one spirit, one life, one energy, and we must come to live in this oneness, see the higher self as the Lord, the witness, the resting place, the asylum, and the friend. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, love people because we see beyond the mask of personality to the spirit within. If we can bring about a change in humanity's view of life and their fellow creatures, then acts of brutality and terrorism and murderous acts, such as those carried out in many parts of the world, will reduce significantly. Some may say this is impossible in the world, but H.P. Blavatsky states in an article written in 1888, everyone lives and thinks and speaks. If all our readers who have sympathy with Lucifer, and this is not the Lucifer that the Christians talk about, it's the magazine Lucifer, and Lucifer means the light bringer. So to say it again, everyone lives and thinks and speaks. If all our readers who have any sympathy with Lucifer endeavoured to learn the art of making life not only beautiful, but divine, and vowed no longer to be hampered by disbelief in the possibility of this miracle, but to commence the Herculean task at once, then 1888, however unlucky a year, would have been fitly ushered in by the gleaming star. And of course, this applies not just to the year 1888, but to any year at any time. H.P. Blavatsky constantly emphasized the practice of theosophy, not just in her books, but especially in her articles, which are worth reading. And of course, the practice of theosophy means divine wisdom. So the practice of theosophy means the practice of divine wisdom, not just connected to the Theosophical Society. So may the energy and spirit of Kwan Yin touch us all today and forever. And may we all come to realize and to live a life of compassion and do what little we can to ease the suffering of this poor orphan humanity. So thank you very much for that. It's a very warm day today in where I am, very warm. So I hope you all got something from that. We'll just end with a few moments of silence, then I'll do the usual mantra to end. And thank you all and wish you all a good day and a happy life, a fruitful life, fruitful spiritually at least. Without any tension, let's just relax for a few moments. I won't do the bell, I'll just do the mantra. Breathe out any tension again, be relaxed. Om Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace. Peace on earth and goodwill to all beings.